everybody, and welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Christina Prevett. I am one of the co-faculty in the Modern Management of the Older Adult Division of ICE with my partner in crime, Dustin Jones. And today, I thought we would kind of elaborate on a discussion that took place this week in the Senior Rehab Project. They were talking about, especially now when communication in healthcare is such a huge topic. We were talking about how, we're trying to be aware of ageist sentiments. And if you've been following Dustin and I at all, then you know that, we talk a lot about trying to take ageism out of our healthcare profession and not assuming that because of the age on a birth certificate that a person is incapable of doing certain tasks. And I talk a lot about the master's athlete, who I feel like is the perfect population to start smashing those aging stereotypes and really start incorporating positive aging stereotypes. But when this conversation started happening, we started saying, okay, but when do we need to just be good communicators? And what do we mean by that? So we know that we're going to have some physiological changes that happen with age. And this is part of normal, successful aging. We're going to see less redundancy in our systems, a loss of reserve. We're going to see some loss of resiliency that can be mitigated through physical therapy intervention, all these things that we know. But what happens when we start seeing accelerated losses, and that leads to different issues and impairments in an older adult? And so the question became, and something that one of the members in the Senior Rehab Project had said, is at what point am I being an effective communicator to my client by changing my style, by speaking more loudly, by making my speech a little bit more easy to understand, those type of things. And when am I being ageist and just assuming that a person at the age of 70 is going to be hard of hearing? And I thought that was an amazing insight, because oftentimes what ends up happening is that we assume that somebody who's 75 or 80, that, well, I'll have to speak to them a little bit louder because they're going to have a hearing impairment. And just like the loss of reserve, we know that age is a risk factor for many different chronic conditions, including hearing loss. But I would argue that some of our younger people in my cohort probably are going to have much worse hearing at 40 than some of my clients in their 80s because of technology. We've grown up with blaring music in our ears, where we have accelerated hearing loss that is happening at a lot younger of an age than somebody who has not necessarily grown up with those technologies and haven't had that exposure that can lead to loss. And so I guess the distinguishing characteristic for me is, how much do we know about a person's medical history that can justify a change in our communication style? And here's what I mean by that. So if we have a person that's in front of us and we're seeing on their medical record, their EMR shows that these individuals are using hearing aids, that there's some cognitive impairment, that there is XYZ going on, then your change of communication style is just to make you a more clear communicator to your client, to improve your therapeutic alliance. I even think that this kind of goes right in line with some of Jeff Moore's stuff about building the bike. If you are communicating clearly and your client feels like they are being heard, that they are being listened to, that you are speaking directly to them in a language that they understand, and they're not getting that glazed eye look because you're either speaking too quickly or you're not looking at them directly, and so they can't hear you because they use a little bit of a combination of their hearing but also lip reading to see and understand what's going on around them. That is different. That is you taking the person that's in front of you and modifying your communication style to be an effective communicator. When we start getting into more ageist sentiment, is assuming that we're going to blanket statement everybody and say, okay, well, I know that on your birth certificate it says 1930. So I know that you're almost 90 years old. So I know that you're going to have some cognitive issues, and I know that you're going to have some hearing issues. And so I'm going to, without even conversing with you or looking at your chart, I'm going to speak in that way. And so I think that there is a really clear delineation between, taking the person that's in front of us and making those communication changes based on their circumstances versus, making a blanket statement. And the topic of ageism and the way that we're talking about ageism, I think, has been growing in popularity over the last several years. Part of that is because of Ashton Applewhite. She was on the Senior Rehab Project right at the beginning when Dustin started. And she was talking a lot, and Dustin and her were talking around what it means to have ageist sentiment. And she was talking about on a TED Talk that she had done in 2017 about how one of the biggest fears that we have in middle age is getting older. And what we've come to realize by studying happiness is that the older we get, the less we fear getting older, because we have more satisfaction with our life. We've had more lived experiences. And so I think us as clinicians, we become very sensitive to the way that we're communicating. And I reflect on it because sometimes I think about my own biases, and am I being very sensitive about ageist sentiment because I'm afraid of getting older, and therefore I don't want those type of stereotypes bestowed upon me. So I'm coming up to a big birthday. I'm about to turn 30 in July, and the thought of turning 30 has terrified me. And I have no idea why. It is just another year. But because we're in that transition of decade, and I know, my dad just turned 60, and that transition from 50 to 60 was really hard for him as well. And it's because of this thought around what it means to get older. And those are my own biases, because I am very capable of doing anything that I want to do. I'm still competing at a high level in sport. I have all of these like a wonderful and fulfilling things going on in my life, but my own bias around getting older and what that means is perpetuating some of this ageist sentiment. And I recognize that in myself. Ashton also goes on to make a really great point, because things like anti-aging products, where as a society, we are fighting tooth and nail against getting older, against being older, is one of the things that is probably driving some of this sentiment. Because how much money do some people pay for anti-wrinkle creams, for Botox, lip injectors, tummy tuck, breast augmentation, plastic surgery in general? And this may be driving some of this change. So in terms of effective communication, we want to make sure that, we're checking our own biases. Are we being ageist because of our own beliefs? And then are we projecting some of our beliefs about what we think it means to be 50, 60, 70 onto that person and communicating in the way we think that we should be communicating? Or are we taking what is on their medical record and becoming effective communicators by considering what those discrepancies or issues or impairments may have on that individual? So there's a big delineation there, and I think there's a lot to reflect on there. The last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of communication, and something that I've written about in the last couple of years, was started with an article that's was titled "Don't Call Me Hun." And so when we had this conversation on the Senior Rehab Project, I started talking to my older clients. And so I see people with a very wide array, my words are escaping me today, wide array of ability levels. I have a 75-year-old who I'm seeing for personal training because I believe that I can help her get ready for a 6-week trip to Portugal. She wants to be able to walk around. And then I have people who have had different surgeries and things, and so their level of ability is much lower. And I talked to all of them this week, and I said, what do you think about, or what bothers you with the way that somebody who is younger than you, whether they're in the healthcare profession or not, what bugs you about how they communicate with you? And some of the things, like assuming that, some of the things I mentioned before, assuming that you're hearing impaired or that you have cognitive impairment, all that type of thing came up. But the other thing that came up with a resounding clarity was the use of pet names. And this came up in the thread as well. So in the thread, when we were talking about effective communication styles, one of the things that came up is, how often do you see an older person doing something relatively incredible? Like, I've seen this on a deadlift video of somebody who's 84 picking up 250 pounds. And the comments are, oh my gosh, that's so cute. Or look at that cute older man, or look at that cute older woman. And almost like they're speaking like like you would to a baby, to somebody who is older. And this can come up in the healthcare sector a lot. I was at a aging conference in Kingston where I live, and there was a comedian who did the closing remarks, and she was talking about her mother-in-law going through the healthcare system. And in this particular instance, she was talking about nursing staff, but it could be anyone. I've seen it across the board, where your person is very ill and they come in, they're like, how are you, sweetie? How are you, honey? How are you? And give some sort of pet name. And the comment that she was making is that it drove her mother-in-law crazy, because her mother-in-law was a working professional. Before she got ill, she was still working in advocacy and still very, very involved in different boards of directors, committees, and just happened to have the flu that led to pneumonia, which led to a stint in hospital. And people weren't treating her with respect, and they were assuming that these type of pet names, which also cross almost like a personal boundary, where you're making a closer, what am I trying to say? A closer relationship. Like, I wouldn't call a stranger on the street hun, unless I, like, for example, knew them really well, or had a certain level of physical or personal or emotional or mental connection with them, that would, bring me to speak to them so colloquially and speak to them with that level of familiarity that comes with some of those pet names. And so the fact that this was so widespread across my clients this week just speaks to the fact that this is a much bigger issue. Even on Facebook, on Instagram, I shared something with the Senior Rehab Project where we were doing power movements with a client. And so we had them with a walker and they were doing jumps. And I was getting comments like, that's so cute. And that wasn't the intent. Like, the intent of that story, or that sharing that information, was that we need to start to develop power. And this is a way that we can do that safely as a clinician. And we know that power development is going to maintain type 2 muscle fibers, which is going to help with reactive balance for a falls prevention strategy. And so even just in the last 2 days, because I've been thinking about this, I'm probably more sensitive to it. But these type of sentiments are a really important thing for us to consider, and something that I don't think we really talk about. And that's not going to be that everybody is going to not like those terms of endearment. They were talking about different southern states, how that is a very, very common manner of speaking to individuals. It's not as common up in Canada, but if that's part of a cultural consideration, then absolutely. But it's when those boundaries get crossed and people start becoming uncomfortable, or that is just a reflection of our own bias, that we're almost making these individuals who have contributed to our economy, have a high level of education, who are very, very profitable members of our society, and we're calling them hun and cute and treating them as if they're 5 in terms of the way that we speak about them, then it's something that we need to consider and check ourselves. And so I thought that it was probably the third thing that, in terms of effective communication, because it's the one that my clients hate the most. And I was thinking about this, and I was in the same boat. I was in my late 20s, and I was at a store, and I had somebody who was in high school who was like, oh, great, hun, see you later. And I was like, hun? I was like, I'm like 10 years older than you. What do you mean you're calling me hun? And because that was my instant reaction, I couldn't imagine that happening on a very consistent basis to some of my older clients. And so take home from all of that, in terms of being effective communicators to older adults, I think there's a delineation between making a blanket statement for everybody at the age of 70 that either they're going to have some sort of cognitive issue or some sort of hearing issue that is going to have to cater our communication style to them, versus seeing on a medical record or after conversing with individuals and understanding what their communication needs are, adapting our communication style to the client that's sitting in front of us. One is going to build the bike. It's going to create therapeutic alliance. It's going to make sure that we have a good communication and relationship with our client, versus the other may actually be working against that therapeutic alliance because they can be thinking, oh, there's another healthcare provider who thinks that I don't know what I'm talking about. And then the last thing is around the terms that we use. Are we creating a certain amount of respect and assuming that our clients don't want us to call us hun or be called hun or sweetie or cutie pie or whatever that colloquial term may be? And are we asking permission to be using those terms of endearment to some of our clients if that is something that we are choosing to do? All right, that is it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. This actually corresponded really well with where we are in our online cohort, because we talk about ageism and the assumptions of aging at the very beginning to set the stage. If you guys are interested in our next cohort, it starts March 18th. We already have a couple people signed up, so jump on if you are interested in doing the online version of the Modern Management course. Dustin and I, February 9th, are in Casper, Wyoming. We're super, super excited to be doing the live version of the Modern Management course. So if you guys are in that area of the US and you are looking for a live Jerry PT focused course, I hope that we get to meet you there. If you guys have any questions, comments, please feel free, put them in the box below. Please make sure you tag me, because sometimes I get so scatterbrained that I don't check underneath my videos, and then a couple of days have gone by and I haven't answered your responses, and I want to make sure that I'm answering. So have a wonderful Wednesday. Sorry for the background. We are packing, and so you're going to see all of the stuff in the background all packed up and messy, but it's all good. And we will see you in a couple of weeks.